Nintendo's original Game Boy from 1989 was pretty revolutionary to say the least, and was a massive hit, bringing beloved franchises to the handheld market as well as fresh new ideas. The one major problem with the original Game Boy is that it was dark and monochrome, only being able to show greens, grays, and blacks on top of having a very dimly lit screen. 9 years later, in 1998, the Game Boy Color stormed onto the scene with better graphics, much more memory storage, and finally added color to this type of gaming. It was a pretty big hit, and combined with the original Game Boy, they are the 4th best-selling game systems of all time. Some series had brand new games here, like The Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Ages and Seasons, and the monster success of Pokemon's Gen 2 games, Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Other games were ports or alternate versions of existing games like Donkey Kong Country, Mario Golf, and Mario Tennis, and there were also a number of game series that got their own Game Boy Color releases that acted as sort of simplified variants of their home console releases that were kind of a hybrid of a port and a new game entirely. They weren't necessarily meant to replace their higher quality counterparts, but act as quick and accessible on-the-go versions. One of which I talk about in my James Bond Retrospective series, The World Is Not Enough. And I specifically remember going to Blockbuster back then to check out the GBC version of Perfect Dark, since I was a huge fan of the N64 game. But Capcom actually had plans for their own handheld version of a Resident Evil game, a re-release of the original Resident Evil, all set to go for the GBC. However, there were a lot of programming issues though, and this idea was ultimately cancelled in March of 2000. So by this point, the series was kind of in a strange position. Resident Evil games were mostly bringing in the sales, but 2000 and 2001 were kind of at a low point for the series thus far, but were huge turning point years for gaming in general. Sony had the PlayStation 2 that absolutely demolished the competition, Nintendo was gearing up to have the GameCube take over for the Nintendo 64, Sega had the Dreamcast that ultimately ended their time with making consoles, and Microsoft was all set to enter the arena with their release of the Xbox in late 2001. It was probably difficult for developers to plan out games because, with certain issues, games can take a bit longer to make and the systems they were originally intended for would then be outdated. This was the case with Resident Evil 0 being planned for the Nintendo 64 with a late 2000 release date, but that ended up switching over to the GameCube after Nintendo announced this new system. And throughout the rest of 2001, Code Veronica ended up getting a re-release under the name Code Veronica X to end its failing Dreamcast exclusivity and be on the PS2. And then the most recent release was a port of the arcade game Gun Survivor 2 Code Veronica that I talked about last time for the PlayStation 2 that never made its way to the North American market. So what next? Well, Capcom wanted to revisit the idea of having a Resident Evil game for a handheld system, even though the idea for RE1 never came to fruition. Capcom had originally hired small British developer M4 Limited to work on a Game Boy Color port of Dino Crisis. M4 only had a few games to their name, including Jeremy McGrath Supercross 2000 and Mary-Kate and Ashley Winner's Circle. But M4 was having a bit of difficulty working on the port of Dino Crisis, ultimately stating that having the game for the Game Boy Color simply would not work or be any good. Capcom instead had them shift their focus to work on a completely new Resident Evil game and scrap the Dino Crisis idea. But here's the thing, the Game Boy Color was close to 3 years old at this point in time, and its successor had just been released in Japan in March of 2001, the Game Boy Advance. A similar situation that I just talked about with RE0. Apparently, M4 tried to get production shifted for this next game to be for the Game Boy Advance, but Capcom didn't want to spend even more money on this with the game being so late into production. It seems a lot of time was wasted on that Dino Crisis idea. And so, in May of 2001, Resident Evil Gaiden was officially announced for the Game Boy Color, an outdated system in Japan and a soon-to-be outdated system in North America and Europe 1 month later. The project was actually somewhat overseen by Shinji Mikami himself, and director of Code Veronica was brought in to write the story, Hiroki Kato. Originally, only a European version was announced, as it was being co-published by European publisher Virgin Interactive, and it was unclear as to whether or not North America was going to be getting the game at all, a similar situation to Survivor 2. So all the way at the end of the year, Resident Evil Gaiden was officially released for the Game Boy Color on December 14th, 2001, but only in Europe. It would be over 3 months later when it saw its Japanese release in March 2002, and then not even until June of 2002 in North America. By that point, for Japan and North America, the next series release was already out, a remake of Resident Evil 1 for the GameCube, which will be the next episode. But for now, let's check out what this little outdated game was as we look at the box art, the manual, and the game itself. I have personally beaten this game twice, but it is one of the few in the series that I do not actually own a physical copy of. So first of all, the title, Resident Evil Gaiden. I grew up with my brother being really into the Ninja Gaiden games on the NES, but I always assumed the term Gaiden meant something for that title alone. So it was weird later in life to see the term Gaiden paired with Resident Evil. But Gaiden essentially means side story, so with that knowledge, the story they came up with here is not meant to be connected to the overall established story of RE1 to Code Veronica. For the European cover, we simply get a red and white life ring hanging on what looks like the side of a ship that has been splattered with blood, and the name Starlight is written on it. That's pretty much it. It's super simple, but tells you that it will have something to do with a boat. For Biohazard Gaiden in Japan, it's the same cover, just with Gaiden in white instead of gray, but the North American cover is way different. We get an anime-style drawing of our old friend Leon S. Kennedy in full RPD uniform and body armor, over a red background and a raccoon police officer badge faded in the back. Judging off of this cover alone, you would think this game would be a side story of Leon back at the RPD. Absolutely no hint at it being on a boat or having any nautical theme. So let's see what we get in the old instruction booklet. The horror looms. In an effort to stop the global operation of the evil corporate entity, Umbrella, an underground organization consisting of STARS members and ex-Umbrella employees was formed. Now, at the clandestine hideout of the underground organization, Barry Burton and an unidentified woman are discussing the mission. Leon on the cover and Barry Burton back in action? Oh, heck yeah. A new type of bioorganic weapon, BOW, developed at Umbrella Labs has escaped and is believed to be on board the luxury cruise ship Starlight. The ship is currently crossing the Atlantic heading for Europe. Leon S. Kennedy was sent to eliminate the BOW. His last report confirmed that he had boarded the Starlight. He has not been heard from since his last communique. Barry can't believe that Leon simply disappeared. He is one of their best STARS recruits. The feedback from base was sketchy at best, but it seemed that Kennedy had made his last contact with HQ shortly after boarding the cruiser, which has since been reported drifting aimlessly in the Atlantic like a ghost ship. Barry suddenly remembered a poem he learned as a child, which now echoed in his mind. I loathe the ocean and the secrets it holds, forever deep, dark, and cold. For some reason, the words sent a chill down Barry's spine. Had the horrors of Raccoon City surfaced again? It's a pretty awesome choice to finally have Barry back. In the canonical ending of RE3, he was last seen rescuing Jill seconds before Raccoon City was completely blown away. But aside from that, he has only appeared in the original Resident Evil. And same for Leon only being in RE2, but as we just learned, he has gone missing. It's an intriguing setup and a return to some classic characters. And we get some character descriptions here. Leon was a rookie cop when he started out on his first assignment in Raccoon City. He is now a veteran and one of the most highly skilled recruits of the underground organization. He is idealistic and deeply wants to protect and serve, but he has experienced at first hand the harsh truth of reality. At first glance, he may look naive, but he has been known to be aggressive and even arrogant when necessary. Leon is highly qualified in his line of work, and a good sense of humor makes him popular with his colleagues. Wow, so Leon has become an aggressive and arrogant, highly skilled veteran and has developed a strong sense of humor. That's a big change from the last time we saw him. Barry is a former SWAT team member with more than 16 years of experience. He is regarded as one of STAR's most exceptional members. He is a highly skilled weapons expert and supplies and maintains weapons for the underground organization. Barry is very much a family man with strong values. Past experiences have made him wary of others. Yeah, I'll say, RE1 was all about Wesker blackmailing him and threatening his family. But it's good to see him back. I love Barry. Did I mention our cat is named Barry? And we get a look at a new character here too. Little is known about Lucia, except that she is an orphan child who was adopted approximately 2 years ago. Lucia was picked on by other kids because she was different. Things had gotten so bad that her foster parents decided to send her to live with relatives in Europe. The first available passage was on the Starlight. Uh-oh, we have a bullied orphan child in danger. Time to let my boys handle this one. So that's where we are for setup here. Let's get into the game. Well, alright, we now know we are officially playing as Barry, and we're flying onto the Starlight via helicopter to find Leon and eliminate the BOW. And I will never get tired of these games always referring to him as Leon S. Kennedy. Barry and Leon are friends and colleagues, but Barry must be told by the chief that Leon S. Kennedy of Raccoon City Police Department was tracking the BOW. Good stuff. So then HQ tells you from your PDA that you are on side deck 2F and you must make your way west to the lobby. And so the gameplay begins. As this is obviously a Game Boy Color game, the graphics are going to be what you make of them. GBC games are very pixelated by nature, and that's part of what gives these games their charm. Some of these games look great in this style with the colors that really pop and show off their excellent pixel art. So I was originally curious to see how they handle survival horror here. We get pixelized images of faces in the cutscenes, and I mean, I can mostly tell that it's supposed to be Barry. A gruff, red-haired, bearded guy. Yeah, that's Barry. But in regards to the style of gameplay they chose here, they stuck with the third-person approach, but it kinda has a top-down angle where you can walk in 8 directions, and the screen scrolls horizontally or vertically. Barry himself is somewhat small on the screen, so he's mostly made up of a generic faceless person in gray clothes. I mean, his face is literally 3 white pixels. But it's okay for what they were going for here. So you move across the deck heading west, grab some handgun bullets, then some yellow herbs, well that's different, until you reach a door. HQ chimes in to tell you that there are hostiles behind the door and then explains how combat works. So you go through the doors and... what in the name of... what has happened to these people? They're not human anymore. Oh, Barry. He must have forgotten all about that minor inconvenience in his life of the Spencer Mansion incident and Raccoon City being taken over and blown away. Oh, but that's right. This is a Gaiden game. And then you get to experience this very unique method of combat here. You can aim your reticle at the zombie, which will then bring you into a first-person perspective. Enemies can also run into you, in which they will be right in your face for combat. Depending on how far you were from the enemy, they will slowly approach you on the first-person screen, and if there were others nearby, they will each have their own hitbox. The closer they get, the more damage you'll take over time. In the middle, a slider will constantly move from left to right and back at a fairly quick speed. You want to press A to fire when the slider is exactly over the darkest block to deal more damage to the zombies. Pressing it on the white part just outside of it will deal some damage, and outside of that will be a miss. The closer they are, the bigger the hitbox is, but the risk of being hit is also higher. It's all about timing your presses rather than accurate aiming, and I gotta say, I can't even name another game that has shooting mechanics like this, but I'm sure some exist. It can absolutely be a bit jarring at first, especially for Resident Evil fans, and I can see it really not working for some people. But it's certainly a different approach and takes some getting used to, especially if you're feeling the pressure of an incoming zombie. And I think the zombies look okay for what they were going for here. They're all green in tattered white bloodstained clothing, but seeing their black eyes approach you in the dark along with the moan sound effects can be a little effective. The combat screen also shows your health and ammo count as well. But also for a first in the series, enemies can drop loot. After you take down a zombie, you can search its pockets for herbs or bullets or whatever. Heading west, HQ tells you to make your way to the security room on the 4th floor through the elevator to see if you can find Leon on the cameras. So you get to explore some more hallways of the ship, and I actually kind of like the effect of some zombies hiding in the dark. What I don't really love here though is the music. It's just a little too chippy, I don't know. I think little to no music would have been so much more effective if they were trying to go for scary. I'm not really a fan of the repetitive battle theme either. A designated fast-paced battle theme makes it feel more like Final Fantasy or something, and for me, it gets grating pretty quick. Again, if they stuck to a focus on the moans of the zombies in the distance, it would come across as more unsettling. I know every Resident Evil game has had music up to this point, but for a Game Boy Color game, I say less is more here. But killing one specific zombie grants you a key to the elevators to make your way to the 4th floor. Going up through the elevator, you're on the outside deck, and it is in absolute tatters. Broken floors into blackness everywhere. But the security room is close by. Will Leon in fact be alive? I guess you'll have to play the game to find out, because that's pretty much the first part of the game. But also, like, he's on the cover and given a detailed description in the manual, so you can assume he's okay. But aside from the very different style of combat, there's some returning elements that we all know and love from the past. You're still exploring creepy areas, looking for items to have in your inventory. There's the handgun, shotgun, knife, grenade launcher, etc. Different types of herbs and all of that. But one new thing here is the smart icon system. On occasion you'll see little icons in the bottom right. One signifies if a door is open or locked, green exclamation marks let you know there's an item nearby, a red one tells you there's an item on an enemy nearby, a purple skull means you're about to deal with multiple enemies, and a red skull means you have been poisoned. Given how little space you have if you're indeed playing on a tiny GBC screen, this icon system helps you to orient yourself a little more. And as far as herbs go, there are actually 5 different colored ones here as opposed to the standard green, red, and blue. This time, green pretty much works the same. It heals a small amount of damage. But yellow heals a little more, and red heals a lot rather than the need to combine them. Blue heals poison per usual, but purple heals poison and your health. Purple is the top herb here. And well, those are pretty much the basics of the game. It's definitely a different approach to the series, and it's something to check out if you need a break from the classic style. Me personally, I think the game is fine. I don't love it, I don't hate it. I already stated that I think the atmosphere could have been handled better, and that's mostly on the music. Also, that combat system will not be for everyone, and while I appreciate what they were trying for, it's absolutely not my favorite. Relying only on timing presses from that sliding bar over and over and over kind of makes it feel like a minigame from Mario Party or something, rather than a shooting mechanic. That combined with the battle theme gets old real quick, and combat is a huge part of the game. But your experience will certainly be more enjoyable if you get better with the timing. If you don't, you're going to have a real frustrating time here. I wouldn't put this game anywhere near a top list or anything, but I think it can still be worth checking out. It actually can be pretty fun exploring and finding items and keys to help progress through the cruise ship and seeing where the story goes. Speaking of, yeah, they finally got their game with a zombie-infested spooky cruise ship that they planned way back for RE3. Certainly this will be the only time this series takes place on a cruise ship. Sales-wise, I couldn't really find much about it. All I do know is that it did not crack the 1 million sales list for best-selling Game Boy Color games. So I'm guessing it probably sold a little better than Survivor 2 did? It had to have, right? Maybe? But well, reception-wise, this game didn't blow anybody away by any means, and it got mostly low to mediocre reviews, with IGN going as low as a 4 out of 10. It also just came out at a pretty unfortunate time too. Like I said, the Game Boy Advance was already out, and by the time this game came out in Japan and North America, the remake of Resident Evil 1 was just out in the GameCube, and not to get too ahead of myself there, but that's kind of a legendary release. I don't see too many people back then going for this weird Game Boy Color spin-off game instead, unless all you have is a Game Boy Color and not a GameCube or something. I wouldn't say it's a forgotten gem or anything, but I also don't think it's nearly as bad as a 4 out of 10. In hindsight, it's just a strange and mostly forgotten release for the series, and Resident Evil as a whole was in a lackluster situation lately. They started off with the absolute bangers of RE1, 2, and 3, all selling incredibly well, and then went on to Survivor, which was poorly received, Code Veronica, which was originally only on a failing system, and then a sequel to Survivor, which is considered to be among the worst in the entire series. And now this outdated, forgotten, and mostly disliked Game Boy Color game at a time where nobody really wanted it. Capcom needed to get back to their heyday of the first 3 games, and it was about time to go all out. Join me next time as we head back to the beginning to do it all over again. I'll see you all for the 2002 remake of Resident Evil. Paraspectre will return.